talk about 1 Samuel. Lord, we are so thankful for your word and the joy and the hope that it brings. And as we think of the dark period of the Judges, and we think of the diamond that is Ruth, and we think of then how it segues into 1 Samuel, which we are covering today by your grace and strength, we are so overjoyed by the intervention you have and the initial demonstration of what the line of kings will bring, culminating in your Son. And may that history give us hope for the total. May that history remind us of your agenda and purpose and how you achieve that agenda and purpose through your Son. And may we just rejoice in a God who is that good and that mighty, a God who truly delivers and redeems and transforms, and a God who honors his Son in this way, for it all revolves and hinges on him. So Lord, help us to have that joy, particularly at this time of year, but especially in light of this book. In your name we pray. Amen. So, we have been covering Old Testament Survey 1 from Genesis and following, and I want to bring out a certain emphasis in the summary this morning. I want to talk particularly about not only the issues of Genesis and God's glory. Obviously, that has always been the thesis. We can never lose that. But within this, God, in his plan, has delegated authority to Adam, has delegated authority to man. After all, he made man in God's own image in order that he might, anyone know the rest of the phrase? Rule. That term rule is so important. And so we know that God has always assigned his glory to be displayed in his human king, in his king. In fact, Genesis 3:15 picks up on that. That's why the seed is male, because he parallels Adam, who is male. And throughout Genesis, as we see the line of the seed being preserved, and that line is designed and tasked with mediating and expounding upon God's revelation and promises, we see an emphasis. Genesis 17, kings will come from you. Genesis 14, Melchizedek in the valley of the kings. Genesis 49:10, that there will be someone named Shiloh, and when he comes back, he not only ties his donkey to a vine, but that vine indicates a new creation back to Adam. Does this make sense to everybody? Now, as Israel progresses and continues to advance that agenda to witness and testify to God's majesty and his purposes and plan, in Numbers we meet a guy named Balaam. And do you remember that Balaam talks about the Messiah? If you don't, turn with me to Numbers 24. Okay, Numbers 24. 17 and following. And in Numbers 24, we not only have this guy crushing the head, which should remind you of what passage again? Genesis 3:15, very good. But we see in this text that he will rule. He will have dominion. It says that in verse 19. He will have dominion from Jacob. That word is a very unique word, and it's the same word of Adam's what? Rule. And so throughout the Bible, there has been this strand at critical junctures advanced in the biblical narrative that there is a king. He's Adamic in nature, like Adam. And he will have sovereignty and rule on a global scale. And in fact, and for that very reason, after Israel is settled in the land and beginning their witness of God officially in Joshua, we have seen in Judges and in Ruth that history directly bends to solidifying and establishing that individual in God's plan, revealing him in history and setting the motion forward in trajectory toward Christ. And so Judges and Ruth do that. Judges, the black backdrop, where you see the need for a king on many, many, many levels. And Ruth, the golden diamond, or not the golden diamond, the diamond, the beautiful shining diamond, where you see that this is the story that is going to transform everything. And the person that's going to do that and spearhead that is David. And that really segues us to 1 Samuel, yes? And so with that in mind, make sure you're in your notes in 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. And let's talk about authorship and setting. Authorship and setting. Presumably Samuel did not write this book. And you say, why not? Because he dies in 1 Samuel 25. In fact, anyone here from Russia? It's okay. Yeah, okay. What is 1 Samuel called in the Russian Bible? Say it again. Kings. Yes, it's Kings. Yeah, good job. So, Samuel is just what we call it. All right? It doesn't mean that Samuel had to have written it. The Bible doesn't claim that. If the Bible said Samuel wrote this book, we'd have to say what? Samuel wrote this book, just like Moses claims he wrote the Pentateuch, and the Bible claims that he wrote the Pentateuch. So who wrote the Pentateuch? Moses. Why? Because the Bible told me so, right? I mean, it's that simple. But since the Bible doesn't make an explicit claim in 1 Samuel, we need to be careful of putting words in the Bible's mouth. Y'all with me on this? And there's a reason why in certain Bibles, like the Russian Bible, you can even find it in certain editions of the Greek Old Testament when they translated it. It's called Kings. It's called 1 Samuel is called 1 Kings. 2 Samuel is called 2 Kings. 1 Kings is called, guess what? 3 Kings. And 2 Kings is called 4 Kings. Are you all with me on this? Because they're one unit of book. Does this make sense? They're one long saga of storyline. And that is important because it helps us to understand the agenda of 1 Samuel all the way through 2 Kings, or 1 through 4 Kings. Just guess what this is all about. All those books. They're all about what? Kings. They're all about kings. And you're like, okay, great, they're going to talk about kings. Yes, but they're going to talk, and we're going to talk about this more, a theology of king. A theology of king. That God in history is establishing a theology of kingship. Speak to me.
So is with Samuel and Kings in our Bible, would they be the same author?
They might be. So back to authorship, it might not be Samuel, but it might be a guy who is writing, and as he has taken what happened accurately, inerrantly, and putting it all together in the time of the exile. That could be a possibility. It could be a handoff method that someone writes one part of the story and then another guy picks up on it. That is also possible. I don't think that's unlikely, the latter situation that I just described, for a couple of reasons. But in any case, yes.
Is there a change of style in the verse?
There is a change of style. And you guys even know that. Remember when it talks about the kings, it says, so-and-so did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and then he died, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, that's in Kings, but you don't really have that language in Samuel. See what I mean? So there is a change of style. There's a slight change of genre, but nevertheless, there is connectivity between the 4 books. And so I would argue that 1 and 2 Samuel were written very close to the time of David. They're eyewitness testimony. They're absolutely accurate. And they're obviously inspired by God to give us that message. But then the author of Kings comes along and he says, I want to intentionally hook in to 1 and 2 Samuel. Does this make sense to everybody? And so together, this forms a theology of, kingship. This forms a theology of kingship. Hence, let me just say this. You say, why? Why do you need a theology of kingship? Let me give you 2 layered reasons. All right, 2 layered reasons for Israel. This is all in authorship and setting. The reason you need a theology of kingship back in the day is, first, for Israel, they just need to understand what's going on. They just need to, all these things are happening, And they need to understand, hey, this is the nature of what it means to be a king. This is what God is going to do with your kings and how he's going to interact with them and the promises surrounding them. Does this make sense to everybody? And they need to know who's the real king. I mean, we got lots of candidates. I mean, we do have a Saul, yes? How do we know he's not the right guy? But we need to know that it's really David and that this is what God is going to do with him. Does this make sense to everybody? They just need to know what's going on. But even more than this, especially as you get into the exile. You guys know what the exile is? That's when Israel gets kicked out of their land. Israel collapses, and they're just thinking, is it over? Is it over? Then you need hope. God, through these inspired writers, say to Israel, there's real kingship, and it's not over. And this is what God has done to show you what God will do. There's hope. Yeah, you guys failed, and I'll tell you why you failed. It's because of sin. But sin plays into a theology of kingship, but sin is overcome by a theology of kingship as well. Okay, sin plays into a theology of kingship, but sin will be overcome by a theology of kingship. Now, some of you might be saying, well, how does that work and how does that play out? Well, that plays out over 4 books. We're only going to be covering 2 this semester, and then you get 2 next semester. Does this make sense to everybody? So, sorry, you're not going to get the whole answer now. But, that being said, this is what these 4 books are doing. They're painting the scene. All right, they're painting the scene. Question?
Was Ruth written before these?
Ruth, I would argue, was written around the same time as these.
Okay.
Ruth was written around the same time as these.
Allusions from Ruth to Samuel, or from Samuel, or how do they connect?
Yeah. There's allusions between the 2.
Okay. But which way?
That's sometimes harder to establish, but since it's chronological, it would be Samuel alluding back to Ruth.
Okay.
Because the events of Ruth took place before Samuel.
Right. Even though David's name is there.
Yeah, even though David's name is there, because Ruth is setting up for Samuel, and so Samuel's intentionally drawing and building on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question goes to the point of authorship. Like if Moses as a prophet was able to write about things to part before, like his birth, then his death, why is it that Samuel as a prophet couldn't write about the future?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And our answer would be, yeah, good. Nothing to stop him. Nothing to stop him. However, the difference is that in Moses' day and in Moses' writing, Moses claims to have done it. In Samuel, there is no claim that Samuel was writing at all. If there was a claim, we'd have to say that. And we should say that. And we'd have grounds to say that. And there would be significance in saying that because Samuel would be brought like a prophet like who? Moses, right? But the text doesn't want us to draw that conclusion, at least from that angle. Does this make sense? And we have to go with what the text says. By the way, this is just like Simon Says. You guys ever play that game when you were a kid? You know, Simon Says, clap your hands, and you clap your hands, and then you go, stop. But you're not supposed to because Simon didn't say. So, the Bible says. That's the game we play. This is what the Bible says. So that's what we say. And if the Bible doesn't say it, we don't need to say it. And it's as simple as that. It's kind of nice. Yeah, it's a great job. So, all of that to say is, you have Samuel, and it's a book on kingship, and notice the theological theme, God prepares his king. In the theology of kingship, this is what Samuel is going to help us understand. The preparation for God as king. It really helps us to set the foundational principles, the foundational ideas for a theology of kingship. The foundational ideas for the theology of kingship. And let me just further explain that in relationship to the content of the book. Letter A. We there? Let me explain fundamentally how this works. Fundamentally, the way this book works, the way 2 Samuel works, the way 1 and 2 Kings works, you're saying it's all history, but how does that provide us theology? The answer is through precedent. Through precedent. That events in the past and decisions made and occasions established, they set forth a precedent. They set forth a theology. They reveal something about God's agenda. Okay? Think about Supreme Court decisions. Don't those happen in history? Think about the tragedy, say, of Roe v. Wade. That was about a specific instance in history, wasn't it? But does that not set a precedent or a legal rule that abides even today? Are you all with me on this? And so what God does in 1 Samuel is providentially and often by his supernatural intervention, he establishes a series of precedents that says, let me tell you what the king is going to be like. You're going to see this. You're going to have that. You need that component and that ingredient and that facet to have a true king. Does this make sense to everybody? That's how this book works. So when you're reading the book of 1 Samuel, you don't just say what happened, you say what? So what? Does this make sense to everybody? This is what we always do, but it's important in this book particularly. Now, having said that, here's then how the book works in its general content and flow. The first part of the book establishes two things. It establishes, within a theology of kingship, here are some fundamental components that surround or that are in the context of king. You need to know that. What surrounds a theology of kingship? What does a king need in the infrastructure to really do his job? That's one thing. Here's the second thing, and this is the most important thing. It establishes that God is the true king. God is the true king. What we need to remember is that Israel is not a monarchy. They are a what? Theocracy. Theocracy. And if they have a monarchy, it's going to be a theocratic monarchy. Why? Because Israel's true king is not a human king, but a God king. You need the capital, and you'll hear me say this, the capital K-I-N-G, to help sustain and mediate and dictate what the lowercase k-I-N-G, the human king, does. That is such an important reality. Oftentimes when we go through Israel's history, we're going to say, hey, politically, this wasn't a bad idea for Israel to do. But we're not dealing with human-level politics. We're dealing with obedience to the what? Capital K-I-N-G. That's what matters. Does this make sense to everybody? And so you need to understand, you cannot have a theology of kingship without God the Father as high and center of being king. Okay? That's the first part of the book. The second part of the book says, in light of that, let me tell you what a king is by what he's not, by a contrast. Have you ever heard of the term a foil, F-O-I-L?
First, outer, inner, is that what you're talking about?
No. Oh, no, not mathematical. Foil as in, anyone know in the literary area?
Yeah, you show one character's goodness by showing another character's bad.
Yeah. So you highlight, it's basically contrast. It's basically contrast. You show what should be by what is not. It's like evil twin. Okay? Guess who's the foil for what is good in this book? You guys read this book, so you should know. Saul. God says, let me teach you, Israel, since you asked anyways, what a king is not, or what a king is by what he is not. Namely, I'll give you Saul. Does this make sense to everybody? And that segues, once you understand, hey, when you have a king that you think is good, but God thinks is bad, it's really bad. But it points out the right king for the job. And as a result of having the right king for the job, and pointing to a right king of job, that's the latter part of the book. Now you meet David. And with David, you see something. Not only that, hey, this is the right guy for the job, but this is how God is going to refine him to make him right. Everyone got that? That God will refine David to make him right. And that refining process is very significant because it's going to reveal a lot about a theology of kingship. And so all of this, that God is king, he sets the pace, he sets the agenda. So this is the nature of kingship, and this is how he's going to make it happen. All of that is established by a precedent in 1 Samuel. Does this make sense to everybody? We good on this? That's how the book works. All right? Now, in relationship to the original audience, like I said, this would prove that the Davidic dynasty is the right dynasty. It would prove that this is what God is going to do with David, at least initially. It would prove that this is what is going on. It would prove that there is hope and that God's kingship agenda is a big deal. It would prove all of that. Sometimes I don't think we read 1 Samuel with the idea of hope, but we should. We should. That's intended. But in generations beyond that, while everything that I just said was true, and still is true for us, for generations beyond that, you need to understand, 1 Samuel, and I hope to bring this out, set so many things in motion about Christ. Because if you think about it, if you're saying, hey, this is the theology of kingship, and if Jesus fulfills that theology, even if texts are not directly predicting Christ, do they have application to him? And the answer is, yeah, absolutely. If you say all firemen wear breathing masks, and this guy's a fireman, does he have to wear a breathing mask by your logic? Yes. Now, is the phrase all firemen wear breathing masks prophesying that Mr. Fireman's going to put on his breathing mask? No. But is it still a true statement to say that it has pertinence or it applies? And the answer is what? Absolutely. And 1 Samuel is setting up a theology that inherently relates to Christ. Even if it is not predicting him, it inherently and intrinsically has ramifications upon him. And we need to understand that. And so 1 Samuel is amazing. If you understand 1 Samuel better, you're going to understand Jesus' life better, particularly Christmas. Okay? And I really enjoy it. So it's good. But we need to understand the fullness of what is going on, and hopefully we can do that this morning. All right, questions on that?
Excuse me.
Yeah?
I understand, Israel being a theocratic nation, but if, throughout Judges and Ruth establishes the truth that Israel needed a king in order to bring order. But why is it that now their demand for a king was taken as evil?
We'll get there. Yeah. I'm not dodging the question, but it is in the Bible, so when we get there, we'll get there. Yeah, no problems. But if you understand that theocratic monarchy thing, it's going to help solve everything. Okay, and you'll see the nature of the request. So let's skip the next page and get into the text, shall we? 1 Samuel 1. Introduction to the final judge, Samuel. God begins, here's the main point. God begins the final transition to a king and reinforces its foundation. It is all about the capital K-I-N-G. God begins the final transition into a king and establishes the foundation for this king, this theology of a king. It's all about the capital K-I-N-G. God is king. You must have that as your reference point. Hannah's plight, barren birth, and big things on that excursus. What you need to understand in 1 Samuel is that the opening, and because we know it has ties back to the era of the judges, we know that this is a dark era, right? It's a dark time. Y'all with me on this? It's a dark time. And the conflict between Peninnah, do you guys remember her, and Hannah is illustrative of that. Hannah, her distress, and in fact, I was just translating this with my Hebrew students this morning. do you notice that Hannah is weeping? Anyone see the word? She's weeping what? Bitterly. She's weeping bitterly. In fact, she has bitterness of soul. Where have you heard this word bitter? Ruth. So there's Jeremiah, an example of intertextuality right there, right? Connection. And so we know that Samuel is hooking in to the distress of Ruth, right? It's not love story beautiful all the time in Ruth. It's love story that pierces through the darkness in Ruth. Does this make sense to everybody? And Samuel's in that period of time. But here's what we start to learn. In the midst of polygamy, which is wrong, in the midst of the shame and distress that comes out of this, God starts to work something, and it specifically works around birth and barrenness. Yes? Because Penina can have children, but can Hannah? Can Hannah have children right now? Oh, she's barren. And speak to me. Have you heard of other women earlier than this that have had trouble having children? Name one. Sarah. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone got another one? Rachel. Very good. Anyone got another one? Leah. Yeah. Anyone got another one? You're like, yeah, I don't know. Samson's mother. Right? Didn't God have to intervene in her life? Yes, to have children? Unfortunately, Samson. But but I'm just kidding a little bit. But actually, I'm not. I mean, I am, but I'm not. And I'm not in this way because Samson was a bad guy. We know that, right? Even though he's cool or whatever, delivers new gates to new cities. But we need to remember something. Samson was supposed to be a lifelong, anyone remember? Nazirite. Do you remember that? And we know, and I'm jumping the gun here, but we know that Samuel is supposed to be a lifelong what? Nazirite. Coincidence? No. They are also forming what we call, anyone remember the word? A foil. A foil. This is another hook into Judges. Y'all with me on this? Samson is obviously the bad guy. Samuel's obviously I said Samson is the right. Samuel is obviously the what? The good guy. Both of them are at the end of the period of the Judges, and one is going to make the definitive finish. Y'all with me on this? Okay? And so and I'm going to go back, and then we're going to move forward. Here we have Hannah, barren. And we know, though, in the past, these barren women, whether that be Sarah or Rachel or others, did God intervene in their life? The answer is yes. Did they have a son? Yes. Was that son a major player in God's plan? And the answer is what? Yes. That individual was used to turn things around. Well, guess what? We're going to have a repeat performance, yes? We're going to have a repeat performance here. Hannah is barren, but God will what? Intervene. And her child will be significant, yes? Now, let's do it up a little bit. Because remember, we're starting to set some precedents, yes? We're starting to set some foundations for a theology of kingship, yes? What does a theology of kingship do? It has reversal, and a reversal of distress to joy. Yes? Are you all with me on this? Now, you speak to me. If this is Family Feud. You guys ever play Family Feud? Watch Feud? This has nothing to do with anything. But I was in the audience for Family Feud because my roommate from Masters, his family was on Family Feud, and they won. I was so happy. Yeah. And they took us out to lunch. And as a starving college student, it was a good lunch. Okay, so Family Feud. The way you play Family Feud is you give a list of things and you're supposed to say, hey, what would be at the top of the list relative to the question? So you tell me, New Testament, Christmas, birth. Two things. Two of them that should just be set up by this. Okay, number one. Yes. Virgin birth. Give the man bonus points. All right. That was number one. Now, here's what's unique. Did Hannah have a husband? It's not a trick question. Does she have a husband? Yeah. His name is Elkanah. He says, I'm better than 10 sons. Sure. Okay. Now, does Mary have a husband when she conceives? Not really. Not in the technical sense. She has not known a what? Man. Now you begin to understand, if you understand this pattern, the significance of a virgin birth. Yes, God, does He intervene in the lives of married women who have difficulty having children? Absolutely. And they have very significant individual sons who play a substantial part in God's plan. But the virgin birth means what? That God will do something even better than that to designate a son who will have the greatest impact, the culminative impact of all time. Does this make sense to everybody? Okay? That's what this is setting up for, in part. Y'all with me on this? By the way, and you will see this in this text and other texts, have you heard this phrase, conceive and give birth? Have you heard that phrase before? She will conceive and give birth. You have it actually with the women that you guys mentioned, like Sarah or Rachel. You have it with the virgin birth prophecy, right? A virgin will what? Conceive and what? Give birth. See that? That is no coincidence. That's what ties this whole barrenness motif with the virgin birth, and to say the virgin birth is the birth par excellence of the one who is par excellence. Y'all with me on this? But it actually goes back to something in Genesis. Not 3:15, but the next verse, which would be 3:16. I will multiply your what? Conception, and you will give what? Birth. Hear that language? That is the base root of this whole motif. This whole motif. God's promise to Eve, which is carried through these other women, culminating in Mary. Are you all with me on this? Okay? Christmas. Yeah? Okay, that was number one. What's number two? Who else was barren and then had a child? Christmas. Elizabeth. What's her son's name? John. Yeah. You think this is a coincidence? That there's a similarity? Barrenness, birth, barrenness, birth. What do we have? The New Testament, Luke particularly, he is saying, when God announces His king, He does it the same way. This is the clear announcement of a king. Does that make sense? That's why he starts there. You know, it's, well, why do the announcement with John? Luke says, well, I don't know. Why not? I thought it was interesting. Stick it in there. No. He has a purpose. And the purpose is defined by 1 Samuel, yes? Samuel is the introducer of the what? King. You know that. So if you have all the telltale signs of a birth of somebody like a Samuel who announces a king, then you know the king is coming. Does this start to make sense to everybody? And Luke says, here it is. If you're still having trouble, you guys ever read Chronicles of Narnia? Oh no, we're dead. Don't worry. I just said that because we're going to run out of time. Because we're only in chapter 1, and we have 27 chapters to go, and we're in trouble. So, but back to Chronicles of Narnia. Do you guys remember the stars align a certain way when Aslan is going to come? Do you remember that? And they announce him. History aligns a certain way to announce the coming of Christ for His first advent. That's what Luke is saying. And so it's unquestionable. This is the one. This is the one. The stars have aligned, so to speak. No, history and circumstance and intervention and the way God intervenes has come into alignment, so you know the king is on his way. That's what's going on. And, speaking of which, we said, hey, there are several people who are lifelong Nazarites. In fact, Hannah prays to God. She prays to God that if you would give me a seed, if you would give me an offspring, a razor will never touch his head. Do you see that in chapter 1? Yes, do you see that in chapter 1? Okay? That's what Hannah says. A razor will not touch his head. So, he will be a lifelong Nazarite. We said Sam is one, he's bad. Samuel is one, he's good. What's the New Testament guy who's a lifelong Nazarite? John the Baptist. You think that's just coincidence? Well, I'm going to make John the Baptist a lifelong Nazarite. Why? Well, I think it's sometimes a good thing to do every once in a while, so let's just make it so. No. It's because lifelong Nazarites, they introduce who? Kings. They're kingmakers. And so now that you have it in Luke, and you know this guy's going to be a lifelong Nazarite, and now I'm speaking of John the Baptist, you know what? The kingmaker is here. The king that will change history. Do you see how every small detail of the Gospels starts to come out when you start to understand the Old Testament background? Does this start to make sense? And it's like Christmas isn't just about warm fuzzies because, John the Baptist is cute and cuddly and Jesus is going to be that way too or something in a manger. It is because this is the divine declaration. My son is the king and he's here to change history and he's coming. He's coming. Everything we've been waiting for from Genesis 3:15, moving through Samuel, set in trajectory, it's coming. That's the power of Christmas. Y'all with me on this? Speak to me.
Do we have any of the same situations happening in Revelation with Christ's second coming, like with a prophet paving the way?
Sure.
Like what would be?
Like the two witnesses?
The two witnesses? Okay.
Yeah. What do? They do things like Elijah, Elisha, and there's some other allusions there to Moses and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, they're paving the way. In fact, that's what the Bible explicitly says. When we deal with Revelation 11, their whole life, even their death patterns, have allusions to the tribulation period, Christ's resurrection, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, they're there to pave the way. They're there to pave the way. So, yeah, and the signs and just so many things are going on that mirror what is happening. So that shows you, if you know your Old Testament well, you're saying, this is God's announcement. That's actually why, and I know we're on a total tangent, but it's worth saying. Remember the different kinds of judgments in Revelation? You had the seals that you break. Anyone know what happens after that? It's before the bowls. It's the trumpet. Have you ever wondered why trumpet? Like, why not a chair? Or a spoon? Or like a spanking stick or something. God took the rod of his wrath, bam, seal one, boom. Why a trumpet? Like, bah, 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 you're dead. That doesn't make any sense. And it's because, what do trumpets do? Even from the Old Testament, trumpets announce. These judgments announce God's agenda. And they announce Christ in a way of what is going to happen. And this ties actually into the theology of John as a whole, because we know that Jesus is the creator, right? In the beginning was the Word. So when these judgments start to enact things on creation, what does that show you? The creator is what? Coming. And so now we have announcement. Does this make sense? So yeah, all that's happening, but we're back to Christmas. So, and really we're back to 1 Samuel. So Hannah, God intervenes in her life and gives her joy. Yes? Gives her joy. Changes her life around. Praise the Lord for that. Oh, by the way, you need to be this is a danger for me, so I'm speaking to myself here. But in this story, as well as Elizabeth's story later on, you can't forget that joy isn't just this big redemptive historical reality that pervades an era. And it is that, but it's not just that. It impacts the individual, does it not? Hannah's life was changed. Elizabeth's life was changed. Why? Because of the birth of Messiah. It goes from the big things to what? The most individual things. And you cannot forget that. You cannot forget that. All right. We know Eli's kind of confused, but he understands and he mediates a message that yes, indeed, this is going to take place. And so as it does take place, point 2, we know that Samuel's a lifelong Nazarite. We've already said what is good. You know what's really cool? I don't know, maybe you don't find this cool. I think it's cool. Verse 23 of chapter 1. What does Eli say to her? Or Elkanah, rather, say to her?
Do what seems best to you.
Oh, man. Anyone got a different translation? No? Here, I'll read it for you in Hebrew. Do whatever is right in, guess, your own eyes. Except this time it's a what? It's a good thing. Yeah? The whole period of Judges is being turned around. If you're like, oh, where is that again? Chapter 1, verse 23, I think. At least, that's a verse in Hebrew. So, chapter 1, verse 23. Do whatever is right in your own eyes. Except this time it's reversed. It's beautiful. And so God, through overcoming barrenness, birth, through an individual that's going to be a lifelong Nazirite, kingmaker, announcement of the king, everything is changing, and that sets the momentum for chapter 2. That sets the momentum for chapter 2. Hannah rejoices in her heart, inward joy, tied with corporate joy, and she starts to have a prayer. By the way, this prayer of Hannah should remind you of a prayer in the New Testament around Christmas, which would be what? Mary's, fill in the blank? Magnificat, okay? Mary's Magnificat found in Luke. In fact, Mary's Magnificat draws in part from 1 Samuel 2. It draws phrases from 1 Samuel 2. What does Mary know? What God did with Samuel is all coming to pass what? Now. Mary is a theologian, or a theologianess, or however you want to put it. She's a theologian. All right? I wish we had time, but we don't, to go through this prayer in depth. But can I just point out some things to you all? And it's going to be a twofold thing, especially if you had me for Essentials of Christian Thought a couple days ago. Do you see how there is kind of spectacular reversal here? The bow of the man is broken. The one who has 7 children is in loss, but the one who is bereaved will be the bearer of 7 children. Do you see that? The Lord puts to death. He makes alive. He brings to Sheol, but he also raises people out. Do you start to see that? If you go through these phrases, and look, he makes rich, he makes poor, he makes humble, he makes he makes the proud humble and all this kind of stuff. Verse 8, he raises the poor from the dust. He sits them with the princes. Are you all seeing that? This is reversal on every level. Y'all with me on this? This is reversal on a political level. Those who were the oppressed now become exalted. Those who were the oppressors now become losers. Sorry, Donald Trump. And term or whatever. But here we have also not just the reversal of politics and society, but even economics, poor, rich, poor, yes? We have the reversal of familial joy and pain. Those who were in pain now have joy in their families. Are y'all with me on this? And then we have a reversal, verse 6, of even what? Life and death. Let me just say this. Is your Jesus too small? Here's the theology of kingship. This is the first thing you have to understand. The theology of kingship is the reversal of everything in this depraved world. Of everything. Even the fundamental way that it works in life and death. Does this make sense to everybody? Even the fundamental way of things working in life and death. That's what Hannah, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, is claiming in her song, in her prayer. She knows that the circumstances surrounding her and the theology of kingship, God's agenda in it all will turn it all around. Does this make sense to everybody? Now, here's the second thing, though. This is so important. Because I have a lot of friends, you probably would too, who say, see, this is social justice, right? Turning everything around, reversing economics, reversing politics, reversing life and death. Okay, well, maybe not that one, but, everything else, we're good. Who does this? Not you and me, but who? It's a theology of what? Kingship. Who does this? The king. In fact, someone read the last verse of this poem, of this prayer, chapter 2, verse 12 of 1 Samuel, please.
It's about the thunder from heaven.
Verse 10.
Verse 10, so those who contend with the Lord will be shattered against them. He will thunder in the heavens. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth, and he will give strength to his king, and will exalt the horn of his anointed.
Everyone hear that? He will exalt the horn of his what? Anointed. Hear that word anointed there? It's the word Mashiach, where you get the word Messiah. First use of Messiah. What does it mean to be the Messiah? It means to be the chosen one that will change everything. But guess what? It's the chosen one, the anointed one that changes everything, not you and me. Does this make sense to everybody? We have a different role. And so do you guys remember, especially if you had me for Essentials of Christian Thought, I said the church's job is to attest to the what? The vertical, yes? The gospel that deals with our sin, knowing that God will take care of the what? Horizontal. That's already been established in the story. The right to change the world is not ours. The right to change the world belongs to God's Son. It is His honor and His glory and His delight to do so. When we try to do things on our own, not only do we make it worse, but it is an act of arrogance because we have not acted within God's plan and purpose for us, and we have infringed upon that which belongs solely to the Son. Does that make sense to everybody? That is what is going on in 1 Samuel. But, that being said, go back to the first issue. This is a theology of kingship. Is your Jesus big enough? Does this make sense? People say, well, how does the gospel solve world hunger? Or how does the gospel solve these other issues? Does it? The gospel does ultimately in the end because it announces who? Christ, who actually resolves all of these issues as promised in 1 Samuel 2. Are you all with me on this? When He what? Returns. When He returns. Are you all with? Does this make sense to everybody? Is your Jesus big enough? 1 Samuel 2. Important things going on in Israel at this time. All right, now we got to move. So, wickedness of the priesthood, point 4. What you learn at this moment, and this is going to be an important thing that surrounds the theology of kingship, is that the priesthood, the king is over the priest. The king is a priest. We'll talk more about that some other time. But the priesthood is underneath the king, and the priesthood needs to be a certain way for the king to operate in the land. Israel's infrastructure needs to be a certain way for everything to operate in the land. And so the priesthood needs to be there. But right now, with Eli and his sons, was the priesthood good or bad? Pretty easy to figure. Yeah, bad. Okay? In fact, notice in verse 16 of chapter 2, they're eating the fat of the Lord. Why is that bad news? Yeah, Leviticus says what? The fat belongs to the what? To the Lord. Right? So they're violating all kinds of stuff. In fact, they're not even the right guys for the job, period. Do you guys remember Baal Peor? Remember that event? It was when somebody got shish kebabbed and all that kind of jazz. And God said, I will give the priesthood eternally to the line of Phinehas. Do you guys remember that? These guys are not from the line of Phinehas. They're imposters. You guys remember Lord Denethor from Lord of the Rings? This is Lord Denethor, Eli. This is, that's what's going on there. Right? Imposter. These are imposter priests. And so God says judgment is coming on them. Why? Because for a kingship to work in the land, you need a true priesthood. You need true servants of God who are going to do that work of worship leading.
Do we know the family they're coming from?
They come from the other line, the other line of Eleazar. So not Phinehas, but Phinehas' brother. Okay? All right, here we go. Samuel's official call. Well, we already know Samuel's a lifelong Nazirite, yes? He's a kingmaker. So let's see. But who's the original guy who kind of established the theology of kings? Who's the other author that we've had so far? Major one, wrote 5 books? Moses. Now, notice how Samuel is called. Okay? And I don't just mean his calling, I mean actually how God addresses him. What does he say to Samuel? Calls him 3 times, that's for sure, but Samuel, Samuel. Do you see that in the text? Samuel, Samuel. Why is that important? Yeah, a level of relationship, a level of significance, a level of importance, yes? Abraham, Abraham. Moses, what? Moses. Samuel, what? Samuel. You all with me on this? Samuel is assuming the continued responsibility of Abraham and who else? Who else? Moses, kingmaker. And so God is going to raise up Samuel. He's going to raise up Samuel to help establish not only the kingship, kingmaker, but even help to clean up the priesthood by proclaiming that the priesthood is going to come to an end, which is exactly what was prophesied. Okay? Everyone with me so far? This is a kingmaker. He's come. Now, next page. Ark narrative. Here's the main point. This is the public demonstration of God's centrality. The public demonstration of God's centrality. Throughout all of this, we've been seeing, hey, God is establishing a theology of kingship. This is what he's going to be doing. This is how he works. It's all about him. But now we need to put that in the form. God is the true king. God is the true king. Yeah. Of God's centrality. God's centrality. Now, I think you guys know the story of this ark story, so I just want to help you understand the significance of it quickly. You guys remember they're fighting the Philistines, yes? They always are fighting the Philistines at this time. And so, what do they think? Hey, we can bring in the what? Ark. And that can be like our secret weapon. What are they basically treating the ark as? A good luck what? Charm. They're treating it a good luck charm. So the question is God really central? Is he really sovereign? Well, Israel, do they really believe he's that sovereign? No, because they treat him just like a what? A good luck charm. You all with me on this? Like a good luck charm. Does it work for them? No. In fact, actually, who fears God more? The Philistines. They're like, oh no, the God who brought Israel from Egypt, the God who did all these great things, he's against us. We're dead. What are we going to do? Well, we're just going to go die because, we have no choice. They're like, wow, you guys know more about Yahweh than Israel does. It's kind of weird. It actually shows you, remember how Israel had an effective witness to the world? Did it work? Yeah. Unfortunately, they didn't have the effective witness to who? Themselves. So they're like, wow, did this theology? Israel like, no, but we sure told you. And so Israel gets slaughtered. The ark gets captured. Y'all with me on this? And in fact, this is where the priesthood is in part killed, yes? Hophni and Phinehas, they die, and there's a baby born. Anyone know as the baby's born? Eli dies too. What's the baby's name? Anyone know? Anyone? You just look at your Bible, chapter 4 at the end. What's the baby's name? Verse 21. Ichabod. Because there is no glory. The glory has left Israel. They are starting to realize we treated God as a good luck charm, but actually he's full of what? Glory. Israel knows its error. God is central. Now, here's the question. Oh, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to take you back, chapter 2.
Uh-huh.
Do we know the prophet who came to Eli?
We don't know his name. Yep, just like the Bible says. Yeah. Now, what could the Philistines think, though? Because they won. That maybe our God, what? Is better. Yeah, is bigger and better. Maybe our God won. And hence, they even insinuate this a little bit, and God has to work to counter that. They put the Ark of the Covenant. That's my ark, okay? They put it in front of their god what? Anyone know? Dagon. You know who Dagon? Dagon is half fish, half man. Okay, so I'm going to do it like this. Okay? Dagon. All right? And then what happens to Dagon? Anyone remember? First day? He falls down. Now, why does he fall down? Don't say earthquake. What's the significance of why he falls down? He's bowing down. Everyone's like, he's bowing down to the ark. Well, we need to help him up. So they all come in and pick him up, which to me is hilarious. It's like, so your God is he geriatric? He needs help up? Or what's going on? So you pick him up, and they put him up, and then the next day what happens? Anyone remember? Yeah, his arms and head. Yeah, what does that mean? What does it mean when you're like, what does it mean like that? Dagon is what? Dead. And you're like, well, you could have just signified that by chopping off the guy's head. Why do you have to chop off his arms and hands? Because that's where you actually do stuff. What does it mean? Dagon is dead and totally disabled. He has no power whatsoever. There is only one true God, who? Yahweh. Yahweh is central in Israel, but Yahweh is central where? Everywhere. Okay? And at this moment, something similar to the bubonic plague. You guys familiar with the bubonic plague? It starts to break out. You have these rats and you have these tumors, and it's just terrible kind of stuff. And they moved the ark around Philistia. Did you see that? And let me explain this. And when you go to Israel, you must go to Israel. You will go to Israel. You should have already signed up before you were born. You should be going to Ibex. You will learn the significance of the geography of this. And you need to have the geography in your mind. They were trying... You guys ever have a trouble with your cell signal? And you try to like move somewhere to get better signal? They were like, maybe we lost the Dagon connection. And so we got to like move the ark where the Dagon connection is stronger to suppress Yahweh. Do you start to see what's going on? And so they're moving the ark around to try to see if maybe God's centralized sovereign power would be weaker in certain cases, but guess what? Did that ever happen? No, never happened. And in fact, at one point, when they go to one city, they're like, you must hate us. That's why you're sending the ark here. You are all Ekron haters because you are giving us this thing. And so everyone knows God is central. They send the ark back. This is all found in point number 2. The ark, point 3, is returned. Philistia exerts more reverence to God as they possibly can with the knowledge they have. And so they recognize Yahweh central. Yahweh central in Israel. Yahweh central amongst the Gentiles. Of course, here's the tragedy. Even when the ark is returned to Israel, do they revere it? No, they try to do an Indiana Jones and look inside and they all die. So, all that to say is, God is central. Yes? God is central. You can't move from that narrative and not understand God has been totally sovereign. He's sovereign in victory. He's sovereign in defeat. He's sovereign in his return. He's sovereign in every way. And that's the key of the issue of kingship. You need to respect the capital K-I-N-G. Now, point 7, next page. Or chapter 7, next page. Point 3. Here's the main point. So we have seen so far, God is sovereign. He is central. Here's his agenda. Now we need to start moving things. And so here's the point. God teaches Israel the nature of the king by giving them the wrong king. God teaches Israel the nature of a king by giving them the wrong king. Okay? They don't have a good king. Okay? Now, 1 Samuel 7 shows that Samuel leads Israel in a victorious battle against Philistia. Okay? You guys might remember that story a little bit. You can read it for yourselves. But here's the main point of that. The main point of that is simply this. God can overcome Israel's enemies. He's the true king. This is just picking up on what we heard before. But that's important because point 2 comes up now, 1 Samuel 8. And Israel requests, having seen that, a human king. What should they have known? Based not only on chapters 4 through 6, but just based on chapter 7. Who is their king? God. And so they should have trusted him. But you might say, but Abner, you said that all along you needed a king. So what went wrong in chapter 8? Here's the issue. It's not wrong to ask for a king, but it's wrong to ask for a certain kind of king. See the difference? It's not wrong to ask for a king. It's wrong to ask for a certain kind of king. Not just a king like every other nation's, but a king of one's own choosing. That's the key. A king of one's own choosing. You say, what do you mean by that? It goes back to what we talked about originally. Israel is a what? Starts with a T, H? Theocracy. What did Israel want to become? A monarchy. Not a theocratic monarchy, just a what? Just a monarchy. In other words, they basically said, God, give us a human king, and you don't have to be our what? king anymore. That's not how it works. The whole thrust of these first 6 chapters that establish God is the king. He's always been the king. And he works through a human king, but he's still the king, the capital K-I-N-G. This is basically called treason. Or, to put it more technically, this is called a coup. They were attempting to overthrow God from Israel and get their human king. And by the way, what were they really concerned with a king? They wanted a king who will fight anyone seeing the text? Fight our battles. That's what they cared about. What's the irony, though? Who has been fighting their battles all along? God. It's like, previous chapter, that would be what God does. And in Deuteronomy 17, we know, you guys are probably familiar with this, 3 G's, yes? No gals, no giddy up, and no gold, yeah? But a king, his primary job actually is to write down the law. To write down the law. And to enforce the law in Israel. His job, of course he's going to fight battles and stuff, but that's not job description number 1. Are y'all with me on this? These guys want a different kind of king than what God had in mind. Okay? They had a different idea of king. And so that's why God says to Samuel, they haven't rejected you, they rejected who? Me. Because that's what happened. That's what happened. Okay? That's exactly their act. And so God says, I'm going to give him a king. You get what you what? Asked for. Yes? And that's what we're going to see in chapter 9. Turn there with me. Come on, let's go. Point 3. Here's our buddy Saul. And he comes out. And you want a king that will fight your battles. All right. A king that looks good. I'll give you one. Chapter 9, verse 2. Read it, please.
He had a son whose name was Saul, a choice and handsome man.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Israel. Okay? I mean, this guy is just hot stuff. Keep going.
And there was not a more handsome person than he among the sons of Israel. From his shoulders and up, he was taller than any of the people.
All right, tall guy. Tall, handsome man. Right? Everyone loves Saul. Okay? So, you need to know that description. A, that he's good looking. B, that he's tall. And C, that the Bible describes him. You're like, well, C is obvious. Well, you need to make it obvious. You see, this begins a strategy. Have you noticed that everyone the Bible explicitly describes when it's talking about a king kind of fails? Saul, failure. Absalom, what do you remember about Absalom? He's got great what? Hair. Dead. Even David is described, a handsome man. Does David fail? Yeah, he does. When you see somebody on the outside, you start to realize, and you're basing your opinion on somebody from the outside, you know that's not God's king. That's not God's king. Because as God will later tell Saul and Samuel, God is looking for a man, you fill in the blank, come on, after what? After my own what? Heart. Key word is heart. Based on what book? Deuteronomy. You guys got it. See that? Yeah, Saul looks like a great choice politically. He's tall, too. That's going to be handy-dandy. But it's not the right choice. And it's not because kingship is not determined by human political themes and strategies and standards, but via God's ordination. And so, yeah, Saul looks good. But Saul's completely incompetent. He's looking for his father's donkeys, can't find them. It's hilarious. Wanders halfway across Israel to only find out that they were like 10 meters from his house. It's like, hello? I don't think you look that hard. So you have Mr. Absent-Minded guy, ADD, wandering dude around Israel, and he bumps into Samuel. Of course, this is all providential. Samuel anoints Saul, and he says, this is the one. People are like, I don't know if this is really the one, but nevertheless, Saul is publicly chosen as the king after some tests. Actually, I should probably mention this right here. You need to jot this down. Do you guys remember Saul is anointed as king, and then in chapter 10, there's this conflict with Jabesh Gilead? and remote Gilead. Do you guys kind of remember that story? Look at chapter 10 very quickly. There's an attack on this city, okay? And they say, hey, just cut out your eye. And you're like, what? Like, why? Because if you cut out your eye, your right eye, and you're holding your shield like this, then you can't anymore what? See, right? Because your eye is blocked by the shield. So they're basically saying all of you will now not only maimed, but militarily incompetent. Are you all with me on this? Now, this is important because if you remember, Jabesh Gilead and that whole area, they were the people that married Benjamin. Remember that story? They were the people that married Benjamin to sustain them. So they're actually Saul's what? Saul's from the tribe of Benjamin. They're actually his what? When they marry into your tribe, they are your what? Family. So someone's taking your family hostage and said, I'm going to gouge out your eye. I mean, this is like serial killer stuff. What are you going to do? Aren't you going to go rescue them? Doesn't that make a little sense? And not only that, you just so happen to be the king of what? Israel. So you're like, of course we're going to rescue them. So what does Saul do? Chapter 10. Anyone read it and find out. What is he doing?
He goes that prophecy.
Before that, what is he? He comes in with his what? Yeah, he comes in plowing his animals. It's like, Saul, there's a national crisis. There's been an attack. Your family's being held hostage. Okay, I'm going farming. Like, what? This is Saul. You think, oh, he's good looking. Oh, he's tall. He should fight. He should lead us in battles. Yeah, against like the weeds. I mean, that's basically all he does. And so, yes, the Spirit does come upon him. And then what does he do? He cuts up his what? Oxen. Why? Because God's like, okay, we gotta get this. I mean, if this is going to be a temptation, we're never going to get to David. We're all going to die before then. So get rid of the oxen. Get rid of the temptation. Get them out there. So that's what's going on. And so finally he wins the battle. And he shows, hey, this is what a king can do. But Saul's not the right guy for the job. And Samuel says, okay, let's anoint him anyway. I mean, that's what you want. And so someone read verse 22 and someone read verse 24 of chapter 10, please. And then we got to keep moving.
So they inquired again of the Lord, is there a man still to come? And the Lord said, behold, he has hidden himself among the baggage.
Okay, stop there. You're like, why are you mentioning baggage? You guys remember the baggage. Just remember that for later. 24.
And Samuel said to all the people, do you see him whom the Lord has chosen? There is none like him among all the people. And all the people shouted, long live the king.
Okay, everyone hear that. Samuel's like, look at him. What a specimen. There's no one like him. Everything is based on the what? Outer appearance. Outer appearance. And that's where Saul's going to get into trouble. Next page. Yeah.
I'm talking about it's an issue of authorship, in which context that in verse 5, like we talk about it, Samuel wrote in the book. You get it?
Oh, I see.
Then Samuel told the people the rights and duties of the kingship, and he wrote them in a book. I don't know which book is that.
Yeah, that's not this one.
Do we have any clue about that book?
We don't have record of, we don't have it in existence still, but we don't have record. But that's not uncommon in the Old Testament. It'll talk about in Kings and such. This was written in the book of Chronicles. This was written in the book of Kings. Even in Numbers, you have the mention of the book of Jasher and stuff of this nature. Yeah, that's okay. There are other books that Israel has, but that actually attests that how much they value this one. Yes? Because it actually survived. It actually survived. Now, we need to keep moving rapidly, and so I'm just going to go main point here under point 4, the failure of the human king. The failure of the human king. You guys know the story. He sacrifices to what? Early. Yes? He does not trust God. Failure. And that's where God tells him, I want a man after my own what? Heart. Based on what book of the Bible again? The book of Deuteronomy. Excellent. Point 2, the foolish vow. Do you guys remember? Jonathan, by the way, Jonathan's the real hero of the story. Right? I mean, he's the guy who actually does stuff. And what we'll see, I wish I had more time to prove this and show this, but in the end, he will be determined to give his life for David. And I'll show you how that works. But Jonathan does some good stuff. The Philistines are running away. Saul says, no one eat until we get these guys. Well, why is that dumb? It's like, hey, we're chasing them. We're burning calories. All right, don't eat. Like, we're exhausted. Good. Let's find them. Like, what? Like, you're crazy. So here's what's interesting. This is what Saul says. You're a troubler of Israel. Where have you heard the word troubler? What? Not Jacob. Another guy who starts with a J made a foolish vow. Jephthah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Jephthah, yes? And Achan. What did Achan do? He stole the bacon, right? And got everyone in trouble. Remember that in Joshua? Saul is compared with them. Saul is compared with them. You think he's a great king? He's actually like Jephthah and who? Achan. Y'all with me on this? Point 3. Saul is commanded to kill the Amalekites. Do you guys remember the Amalekites? They're the people who tried to kill Israel when they were coming out of Egypt. Do you remember this? And God said, I'm going to put them out. So here's your opportunity to do so. Does Saul kill those Amalekites? And the answer is what? No. Massive, massive failure. Actually sets up for the book of, fill in the blank, what? Esther. You need to know that. You need to know that. Okay? This is a major, major failure. And let me just say this. In this chapter, chapter 15, God says to Saul, I'm not just taking away your dynasty, I'm taking away your kingship. Why is that important? At this moment, what does God say to Saul? You are no longer what? King. At this moment, technically, David should have become what? King. But Saul is a usurper. Now Saul is Lord Denethor. Y'all with me on this? And David's like Aragorn, right? True king, but kind of like in conflict with this guy. All right, good. Next page. Saul. Our main point, God prepares the true king. God prepares the true king. David is anointed. Why? Because Saul's no longer the what? The king. So David is anointed. And point 2, you have the famous story of David and Goliath. This is not about slaughtering your Goliaths or anything. This is about God's sovereignty in action to showcase the true king. God's sovereignty in action to showcase the true king. Look, all Israel is there. Saul is there. David's brothers are even there. And the question is, who should fight Goliath? Saul. Why? Because Saul is very tall. See why I emphasize the appearance thing? It's like, you got to, and Goliath even says that. Select for yourselves a champion to fight me. I'm tall. He's tall. You know, like, it doesn't make, it's not that hard to figure this out. Saul should have been there. After all, he's supposed to fight our what? Battles, but he doesn't. He doesn't. But then you start to have contrasts, and there are so many amazing contrasts here with David and Saul in this narrative. One of my favorite is David is just bringing the cheese and stuff for his brothers. Remember that? And do you know what it says? He throws his stuff to the luggage. The baggage. And now you start, where did I say, hey, pay attention, baggage. Saul what? Hides in the baggage. He's like, I don't want to come out. I don't want to come out. And David's like, cheese, I'm going to battle, you know. And so that's, this is, if you had a movie of this, that would be played for laughs, yeah? Because, you have the same suitcase or something there, and it's the contrast that shows you Saul is weak, David is strong. Why? Because David is a man after God's own what? Heart. Not because he physically is better or something. And so there are so many different contrasts, so many things drawn from the law. Why does David have certain stones? Why does he kill Goliath with a slingshot? Because what are you supposed to do to a blasphemer in the Old Testament? Stone him. So David is going to do that. Okay, so David is, remember what we said? The king is not primarily to fight battles, he's to uphold the what? The law. But in upholding the law, actually, he becomes victorious. Does this make sense to everybody? This is the signaling of a true king empowered by God to overcome the foe. And that's exactly what happens. And this proves David. All right, next page. By the way, so many more contrasts. Read the text carefully of 1 Samuel 17. You got to. And you're going to just see this. It's just amazing. It's spectacular. And it's hilarious. All right. So, God continues to exalt David. Point 3. And now, one thing you got to know. Just jot this down somewhere. After David and Goliath happens, Jonathan goes up to David, tears off his royal robes, and puts it on David. What does that mean? What does Jonathan know? You're king. And what does that mean about himself, too? I'm not. He's basically said, I am now your servant. My life, what? For your life. And that's exactly what happens. I mean, Jonathan is like the sub-hero. I mean, not sub-hero, in the secondary hero in this story. Are you all with me on this? It's just amazing, the level of friendship they have. And speaking of which, point 4a, Jonathan is the one that keeps protecting David. Jonathan is the one that keeps ensuring that David will move forward. And God does protect David throughout that in the end. Next page. All right. Here is where you just need to write some things down. And it won't be aligned with your points, but it's just going to be real quick, fast, in a hurry, all right? David goes to the wilderness. You guys know that. He's running away from Saul. Why does God send him to the wilderness? Who was in the wilderness earlier? A whole nation called what? Israel. Even a guy named Moses. Yes? Even Adam went into the wilderness because he left the Garden of Eden. Yes? There are overtones of all this story. Okay? There are overtones of all this story. For example, in 1 Samuel 25, there's this place called Paran. It's only mentioned with Israel's wandering in the wilderness. Are you all with me on this? You all with me on this? And you say, why? Two reasons. One, what did God do with Israel and Moses in the wilderness? Did he not refine them? David will go through something similar. So that's reason number one, refinement. Here's the second reason. Corporate solidarity. David must represent my people. So I will make him like my people. Does this make sense? Forging the relationship between David and Israel. That he will be able to bear Israel on his shoulders. So, in light of that, chapter 21 and 22 is one unit, and it deals with bread. Do you remember David lied about the bread? And then, as a result, all the priests die. You all with me on this? Now think about this with me. Think about this carefully with me. Bread, Israel. Where have you heard about bread, wilderness, Israel? Manna, yeah? And man shall not live by bread, what? Alone. This is the test that David goes through. Will you trust God to provide? And does David really trust God here? No, that's why all the priests what? Die. So, fail. Okay? But you understand the significance of bread. 23 through 24, here you have the issue of God's Word. And you say, how do you know 23 through 24 is a unit? Do you guys remember that David was about to kill Saul, but he fails to do it? Remember that? He does that twice. Y'all with me on this? He does it once in chapter 24. He does it once in chapter 26. That helps us to make and establish the texts, the boundaries of the text, the structure of the text. Y'all with me on this? And so God, okay, this is what the people say to David. Hey, David, Saul's going to the bathroom. Kill him. Because God said you would kill him. Did God actually say David would kill Saul? Did God make David? No. So they were taking God's word totally out of context, putting words in God's what? Mouth. But David actually cuts part of Saul's robe, does he not? So he fails. He fails. Now, the last one is about presumption. Do you remember Nabal and Abigail? Remember that story? And David wants to go kill Nabal because Nabal's so foolish and insulting. Does David have the right to go out and kill yet? Is he the official king? No. So you cannot be presumptuous or impatient in this regard. Does this make sense to everybody? And so, in fact, in 1 Samuel 26, David says in response to a request to again kill Saul, he says no, because the Lord will strike him down. The Lord will do this. What does David learn? I don't take matters into my own hands. I let what? God do it. Are y'all with me on this? And so David fails these three tests in the wilderness. Yes, he's supposed to be like Israel. He's supposed to be like Moses, but he's not. And he can't bear them. Now, you tell me, in the future, wilderness, three tests. Jesus. What was the first one about, after all? Turning what? Rocks into what? Bread. The next one was about what? What does Satan say? Jump, because what? It says the angels will what? Catch you. It's a violation of God's what? Word, of testing God. And the final one is what? I'll give you all the kingdoms. Just take the kingdoms early. Don't go to the what? The cross. It's about presumption. But in each of these tests, which are totally parallel, does Jesus pass? And the answer is what? He's the true king. He's the true king. Do you see how 1 Samuel, via precedent, is saying the king must have solidarity with his people. The king must bear them on his shoulders, and the king must pass these tests. And Jesus does, which proves what? He is the true what? King. Are y'all with me on this? And so the way that the book ends, and now we're in chapter 27 really, okay, and that's point 8, is that David is taken in by Philistia, and Saul continues to slip downward as he is confronted by fails with the witch of Endor, and eventually here's what happens. Philistia says, hey, we can't keep you safe anymore, David, get out of here. That pushes David to be more like a king. And do you guys remember when they come home, like the Amalekites steal their stuff, and David goes after the Amalekites? Why is that a good thing? Who failed to kill the Amalekites? Saul. Now David is what? Killing them. Are you all with me on this? And even more than that, here's what you have to understand. In 1 Samuel 30, verse 25, this is what the text says. 1 Samuel 30, 25, turn there. Read it, please. David makes a rule about spoils of war and such. 1 Samuel 30, 25, what does it say?
And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day.
Okay, everyone hear that? If this became a rule and a statute from Israel from this day forward, why is that important? The word statute and judgment, that combination is only used with one other person so far in the Bible. It starts with an M. Moses. What is this text saying? David is the next who? Moses. He is the law enforcer. And so that makes David like a what? A king. Saul at this moment dies, and it's a tragedy. And you see the results of a king who does not walk after God's own what? Heart. But he is there in this tragic ending and through a noble burial to show that God is still faithful, yes? Because Saul's death was not in vain. He kept the enemy at bay in order for the true king to come, and that is who? David. One now who walks after God's own heart, being refined in the wilderness by him. Have a good day.